Some mornings you wake up certain of your place in the world, certain that the decades you gave the sweat, the missed vacations, the sleepless nights added up to something that mattered. And then one afternoon, standing in your own son's backyard holding a store-bought pie, you understand with perfect, devastating clarity that you were wrong. That August Sunday in 2023, I didn't just lose my dignity at a birthday party. I lost every comfortable story I'd been telling myself about my son, about sacrifice, and about what family actually means. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 64 years old. I'm a retired electrician from Columbus, Ohio, and I never imagined that the worst day of my adult life would happen on a Tuesday in August, at a retirement party I wasn't supposed to attend. Let me back up. Before we go any further, if these kinds of real stories resonate with you, please subscribe to Stormborn Vengeance and hit that notification bell. We share true stories like this every single day. Drop a like and let me know in the comments where in America you're watching from tonight. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. My wife, Carol, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack that came without warning on a Wednesday morning while she was making coffee. She was 52 years old. She had never smoked a cigarette, walked 3 miles every morning, and kept a garden that the whole neighborhood admired. Life doesn't negotiate, and it doesn't apologize. One week she was planting tomatoes, and the next week I was picking out a casket. After that, it was just me and my son, Derek. Derek was 27 when Carol died. Old enough to handle it, young enough that I still felt the pull to protect him from everything. He was my only child. We had tried for more, and it simply hadn't happened. So every hope I had, every dream about legacy and family, and someone carrying the Calloway name forward, all of it concentrated into one person. That kind of pressure isn't fair to put on a child, even an adult one. I understand that now. But understanding something in hindsight doesn't soften what it cost. In the years after Carol died, I threw myself into work. I had built a small but respected electrical contracting business over 25 years, Calloway Electric, and I ran it the way Carol had always said I should. Honest estimates, quality work, show up when you say you will. We had 6 full-time employees at our peak, contracts with 3 commercial property management companies in central Ohio, and a reputation that kept the phone ringing without advertising. Derek came on board at 25 2 years before Carol passed. I made him operations manager. I paid him $85,000 a year and told myself it was an investment in the future of the company. I taught him everything I knew. Not just the technical side, though. I made sure he understood every system we worked on, but the business, client relationships, how to handle a difficult contractor, how to write a proposal that was fair to us and honest with the customer. I believed, the way only a father can believe, that I was building something we would share, that someday Calloway Electric would be Derek's and Derek's children's, and that Carol would be proud of what we'd passed on. I also believed Derek loved me. That second belief was the one that cost me more. Derek met his wife, Stephanie, at a Chamber of Commerce event 6 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, and came from a family that had money in the way old money works quietly, permanently, without needing to mention it. Her father, Gary Whitmore, had retired early from a career in commercial real estate and spent his days playing golf, traveling to Scottsdale, and hosting dinner parties at his house in Dublin, the expensive suburb north of Columbus, where the lawns were professionally maintained and everyone drove a German car. Gary was charming in the particular way of men who had never needed anything from anyone. He smiled easily and spoke confidently and had opinions about wine. I liked him well enough at the beginning. I didn't see what was happening until it was already done. What was happening was this. Derek wanted Gary's approval more than he wanted mine. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, though I said it with plenty of bitterness at first. I say it now as a simple observation, the way you'd describe weather. Derek watched Gary and saw a version of success that felt more prestigious than anything I could offer. Gary wore linen shirts and talked about international property markets. I wore work boots and talked about panel upgrades. In Derek's mind, somewhere along the way, I became the version of success he was trying to leave behind, and Gary became the version he was trying to reach. I was the past. Gary was the aspiration. I didn't understand this fully until the retirement party. Gary Whitmore turned 67 inches August of 2023. He had been semi-retired for years and had no formal workplace to retire from, but Stephanie organized what she called a celebration of Dad's legacy, a party at their house in Dublin for about 40 people. She invited Gary's golf friends, their country club set, various people I didn't recognize, and whose connection to Gary I never fully understood. She invited me as well, though in a way that felt more like notification than invitation. Derek mentioned it at dinner 2 weeks before. Dad, Steph's doing a party for her father. August 12th. You should come. Not we'd love to have you. Not it would mean a lot. Just, you should come. Like it would look strange if I didn't. I brought a peach pie from Schmidt's, the German bakery on Kossuth Street in Franklinton, that's been in Columbus since 1886. Carol used to say their pies were the only ones worth eating. I'd been buying from there for 40 years. It wasn't a cheap gesture. It was a meaningful one, the kind of thing that carries history in it. I drove to Dublin feeling the specific low-grade anxiety of someone attending a party where they don't quite belong, and I told myself to relax. These were my son's in-laws. These were family. I arrived at 2:00 inches the afternoon and parked on the street because the circular driveway was full. I walked around to the backyard, which was strung with Edison lights and filled with people in summer clothes holding glasses of white wine. A 4-piece jazz ensemble was set up near the pool. The catering was clearly professional servers in black, moving through the crowd with trays of food. It was elegant in the way that money makes things elegant, effortlessly and expensively. Derek was standing near a table covered in a white cloth at the center of the yard. He was smiling the wide, slightly performative smile I'd noticed him wearing more often around Stephanie's family, the smile that said he was playing a role and enjoying it. Gary stood beside him, already holding something wrapped in navy blue paper, laughing at something someone had said. I made my way through the crowd, nodding at the few faces I recognized. When I got close enough, I saw what was on the table beside the wrapped gift. A set of car keys on a dealer's key fob. I felt the first small premonition of something wrong, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. I kept walking. Derek noticed me when I was about 10 feet away. Something moved across his face, not happiness to see me, not quite. Something more complicated, gone before I could read it. Dad, hey, you made it. He didn't move toward me. I closed the distance. Gary was already tearing into the navy wrapping paper, playing up the surprise for the crowd. Inside was a box. He opened it and lifted out a watch, a large, heavy-faced thing that caught the August sunlight and threw it around like a mirror. Stephanie clapped and said something I couldn't hear over the jazz. The crowd pressed in closer. Derek put his arm around Gary's shoulders and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Gary, you've been more than a father-in-law to me. You've been a mentor and a friend. That's a Breitling Navitimer. You've talked about it for years. Consider it yours. The crowd applauded. Someone whistled. Gary turned the watch over in his hands with the careful reverence people give to objects they know are expensive. I found out later it cost $8,200. $8,200. I stood at the edge of the group holding a peach pie and a white bakery box, and I watched my son present his father-in-law with a luxury Swiss watch while 40 people applauded. Then Derek turned to me, and I saw him reach into the pocket of his linen blazer, Gary's influence, the linen, and pull out a small envelope. Happy birthday, Dad. My birthday had been 3 weeks earlier. I'd spent it alone because Derek said they had a prior commitment. He handed me the envelope with the same energy you'd hand someone a parking validation. I opened it. A gift card. Amazon. $50. There was a post-it note stuck to the back that said, in Stephanie's handwriting, "Hope you find something you like. D and S. $50. While Gary received $8,200. I looked up at Derek. He was already turned back toward the crowd, answering a question someone had asked about the watch. He didn't see my face. Nobody did. I was standing in a yard full of people and I was as invisible as furniture. I put the gift card in my shirt pocket and set the pie down on the nearest table and stood there for a moment, understanding, with a clarity that felt almost surgical, that something between Derek and me had been broken for a long time. I just hadn't been willing to look at it directly. My grandson, Derek's son, from a very brief relationship before Stephanie, 9-year-old Miles, who lived with his mother, but spent alternate weekends with Derek, and occasionally with me, was sitting on the stone steps near the back door, eating a cupcake. He'd spotted me before I spotted him and was watching me with those quiet, observant eyes he had, his mother's eyes. When I walked over and sat beside him, he looked at the envelope in my hand. "What did Dad give you, Grandpa?" I showed him the gift card. He looked at the watch Gary was showing to the cluster of guests across the yard. He looked back at me. He was 9 years old, and he didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "The way children speak when they understand something is unfair but aren't sure if they're allowed to say so. That's not the same." "No," I said. "It isn't. Did it make you sad?" I looked at this boy, this careful, perceptive boy who was the best thing in my son's life and probably didn't know it yet, and I said, "A little. But I'm okay, buddy." He leaned against my arm without saying anything else, and that small weight meant more to me than I had words for. I stayed another hour out of stubbornness, or dignity, or some combination of the two. Derek and I exchanged maybe 100 words during that time, none of them meaningful. He was performing for Gary's crowd and couldn't stop long enough to have a real conversation. I ate a piece of someone else's catered food and drank a glass of water and left at 4 o'clock. On the drive back to my house in Westerville, something inside me began a slow and thorough process of rearrangement. I am not by nature an impulsive person. I built a business over 25 years by making careful decisions and following through on them. I didn't react to the party that night. I went home. I sat in the living room in the chair I'd had since Carol was alive, and I let the feelings settle into something I could look at clearly. What I was feeling was not just hurt. Hurt was too soft a word. What I was feeling was the end of something, the end of a particular kind of hope I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. The next morning I went to my office in the shop behind my house where I kept the company records. Carol and I had tracked every financial decision we made from the beginning of our marriage. Binders of bank statements, receipts, contracts. I kept every one of them. I pulled the files on Derek and spread them on the workbench and spent 3 hours reading things I had written with hope and a pen and never added up before. The private tuition to Worthington Christian for high school, $14,000 a year for 4 years. That was $56,000. I had believed in giving him the best start. Ohio State University, 5 years because he changed his concentration twice, at an average of $22,000 a year, including housing, $110,000. I'd paid every bill without complaint. The down payment on his and Stephanie's house in Hilliard, 3 years ago, $60,000. He'd asked, I'd given. I told myself that was what fathers did. The business loan I'd co-signed, and then quietly absorbed when his first side venture, a home services app he'd partnered on, with a college friend, collapsed in 14 months. Sen went to 10 million. Irregular cash transfers over the past 6 years, money I'd sent when he mentioned tight months, unexpected expenses, once for a medical bill, twice for car repairs, once because things are just a little stretched right now. Dad, I added those up and the number was $47,000. The total came to $307,000. $307,000 over the course of his adult life. Not a loan, not money I expected back. Money I had given because I was his father, and I wanted him to have a good life. And Derek had decided that my relationship with him was worth $50 on an Amazon gift card. I sat at that workbench for a long time. Through the window, I could see Carol's garden, which I still maintained, though it was smaller now than she'd kept it. The tomatoes were coming in. She would have had an opinion about all of this that was wiser than anything I could arrive at alone. I missed her the way you miss a limb, suddenly and completely, in moments where you most need the thing that isn't there anymore. Then I opened my laptop and sent an email to my accountant and my attorney. My attorney was a woman named Patricia Solis, who had done my business and estate work for 16 years. She was methodical, direct, and had the particular quality of good lawyers who can separate their judgment from their feelings. I respected that. I was going to need it. We met 2 days later at her office on East Broad Street downtown. I put everything on the table: the party, the watch, the gift card, the total I'd spent on Derek over his adult life, and then the part I hadn't told her yet, the part I'd discovered on the Tuesday morning after the party when I went into the company's accounting software and started looking carefully at the last 2 years of Records. Derek had been listed as operations manager for 5 years. His salary was $85,000. But over the previous 24 months, there were expenses logged under business development and client relations that, when I pulled the receipts, did not describe business, I recognized. A dinner at the refectory on Bethel Road, $620, listed as client meeting. I checked the date. It was Gary Whitmore's birthday dinner the previous year. A weekend at a resort in Hocking Hills, $1,800, listed as team strategy. I had not been invited to any strategy meeting that weekend. I checked further. Golf at Muirfield Village, the private club in Dublin where Gary was a member, logged twice as client entertainment, $1,400 total. Gary's country club, not a single client of Callaway Electric belonged to Muirfield Village. Derek had spent company money to build his relationship with his father-in-law. Not lavishly, not in one large transaction, but steadily and carefully enough that no single line item would have triggered a question. Across 24 months, it totaled $23,400. I told Patricia everything. She listened without interrupting, writing in her notebook with the precise, even strokes of someone taking a deposition. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me. Richard, the business expense misappropriation gives you legal grounds for termination for cause. His employment agreement doesn't include equity, correct? Correct. I had never given Derek shares in Callaway Electric. I had intended to. I had always told myself there was time, but I had never done the formal paperwork. Then his employment can be terminated with documentation of misconduct. You'd owe him 60 days severance per his contract. Beyond that, nothing. I want him removed from the company entirely, I said. No longer authorized to sign for anything. No access to accounts. Done properly and documented. She nodded. We can execute that immediately. Do you want to discuss your estate planning as well? I did. My current will left Callaway Electric and all personal assets to Derek. The business had been appraised 2 years earlier at $1.4 million. My personal assets, the house in Westerville, investment accounts, savings added up to approximately $680,000. Derek was set to inherit everything, roughly $2.1 million in total. I want to change it, I said. Patricia opened a second file. Over the next 90 minutes, we rewrote my will. Derek would receive $8,200. The precise cost of Gary Whitmore's Breitling watch. The message would not require a note. Callaway Electric would pass to my shop foreman, a man named Leon Garrett, who had been with me for 18 years, and who ran every job with the same care I would have. I increased the succession documentation on his behalf, and we structured a 5-year buyout arrangement at a favorable rate so that Leon could become a true owner without the transition destroying the business. My personal assets would be divided between a trust for Miles, $500,000, accessible at 25, under Patricia's stewardship, and the Carol Callaway Memorial Fund at Ohio State's College of Nursing, where Carol had taken evening classes for 2 years before she got sick and quietly dreamed of finishing her degree. Are you certain? Patricia asked. I want you to sleep on this before we finalize. I've been sleeping on it for 11 years, I told her. Every time I let something go, every time I told myself it wasn't that bad, every time I made an excuse for him, I've done enough sleeping. We signed the documents with 2 of her colleagues as witnesses. I walked out into the August afternoon on East Broad Street and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like a man who was making his own decisions. The next morning I was at my bank when it opened at 9. I had banked at the same Huntington branch on High Street in Westerville for over 30 years. The branch manager, a steady man named Doug, had known me since the early days of Callaway Electric. He greeted me without surprise and brought me into his office. I need to remove my son from all accounts he has access to, I said. I need the business accounts restructured so that his authorization is revoked immediately, and I need to ensure that the line of credit he could access is closed to him as of today. Derek had been added to 3 accounts over the years, for the same reason most parents add their adult children: convenience, emergency access, the assumption of trust. Those accounts held $92,000 in operating funds, $55,000 in personal savings, and a $75,000 business line of credit he had never drawn on but theoretically could. Within an hour, it was all restructured. His name was nowhere. Then I went back to my shop and called Leon into the office. Leon Garrett was 44 years old, the son of a contractor from Dayton, married with 3 kids, and had worked for me since he was 26. He had never asked for anything he hadn't earned. He showed up every morning before the crews, stayed later than anyone needed him to, and treated the customers' houses with a respect that I'd watched him instill in every apprentice who came through our doors. He was, by every meaningful measure, the person Callaway Electric should belong to. I explained everything. The party, the watch, the expense records, the decisions I'd made. Leon listened the way he always listened, completely still, looking at the floor, turning it over. When I finished, he looked up. "Mr. Callaway, are you sure about the company? That's your life's work. That's why it's going to someone who understands what work means," I said. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I'll take care of it like it's my own, because it will be." We shook hands, and I felt Carol somewhere in the room, the way I sometimes do in moments that she would have recognized as right. The disruption announced itself 9 days after the party, on a Friday afternoon, when Derek's business credit card was declined at a restaurant in the short north, a nice place on High Street where he was apparently having lunch with Gary and 2 of Gary's golf friends. I wasn't there. I learned the details later in pieces, from multiple directions. The card was declined twice. Derek tried calling the company number and reached a recorded message. He tried calling the business line for our bookkeeper and got voicemail. By the time the bill was settled, Gary paid, which I'm sure Derek would have found particularly humiliating. Derek had already tried to reach me 4 times. I didn't answer. He called 14 times before the end of that business day. By 9 o'clock that evening, the number was 23. The voicemails moved through stages the way grief does. The first few were confused, almost calm. "Dad, there's something wrong with the card. Can you call me?" The middle ones escalated. I went to the bank and they said my access was changed. "What's happening? I need you to call me right now." The later ones broke into something roar. "Dad, I know this is about the party." "Okay, I know, but you can't just cut me off without talking to me. That's not fair. Please call me back." I listened to everyone. I sat in the living room in Carol's chair, and I listened to my son's voice, moving from confusion to panic, to something that was starting to sound, finally, like accountability. I didn't call back. On Saturday morning, he showed up at the house. I saw his car in the driveway from the kitchen window, and I didn't go to the door. He knocked for 4 minutes. I counted, and then I heard him go around to the shop. I'd locked it the night before for exactly this reason. He sat on the step outside the shop door for 20 minutes. I watched from the window. Eventually, he drove away. Sunday, I went to church. The same church Carol and I had attended for over 20 years. And afterward, I had lunch with my friend Frank Orozco, who had been my closest friend since we met at a Contractors Association meeting in 1998, and who had the kind of directness that came from decades of genuine friendship. I told him everything over burgers at a diner on Morse Road. Frank listened without the performance of shock. When I finished, he folded his hands on the table and said, "How do you feel?" I told him I felt sad and lighter at the same time, which was the most accurate thing I could say. "That sounds about right," he said. "What are you going to do if he comes back wanting to talk?" I told him I'd talk when I believed Derek wanted to understand, not just to undo. Frank nodded slowly. "Carol would have done the same thing," he said. "Faster, probably." That made me laugh for the first time in 10 days. The formal meeting happened on a Monday morning, 12 days after the party. I had Leon call Derek and tell him there was a required employment matter that needed to be handled in person and that he should come to the office at 9 a.m. sharp. Derek arrived at 8:45, which I noted. He sat in my office in the same chair where job applicants sat and tried to hold himself steady, though he looked like he hadn't slept in several days. His eyes were the specific kind of red that comes from crying more than from sleeplessness. I didn't lead with emotion. I opened the folder on my desk and laid the expense records in front of him. The refectory dinner, the Hocking Hills weekend, the Muirfield golf outings, 12 pages of line items with the corresponding receipts highlighted. He looked at them. He didn't deny them. "Derek," I said, You used company money to build a social relationship with your father-in-law, and you disguised it as business expenses. Over 2 years, the total is $23,400. He opened his mouth. He closed it. I also want to show you something else. I pulled out the second document, the lifetime summary I'd done at the workbench. $307,000 over his adult life. I slid it across the desk. He looked at the total for a long time. I watched the number land on him in a way that figures eventually land when you can't deflect them anymore. I gave you that, I said. Every dollar. Not as a loan. Not with conditions. Because you were my son, and I wanted you to have a good start. And on your father-in-law's birthday, you handed him an $8,200 watch and handed me a $50 gift card. Dad, I'm not finished. My voice was steady in a way that surprised me. You have worked for this company for 8 years. I paid you well. I trained you. I intended to leave it to you. And you spent company money on dinner parties for a man who doesn't need your help and doesn't ask for it, while I stood in that yard with a pie from Schmidt's, feeling like a stranger. Derek's jaw tightened, and his eyes filled. I don't know how to explain it, he said, and his voice was rough. Gary made me feel like I was succeeding, like I was someone, and I got so caught up in that, in wanting him to see me as his equal, that I stopped. He stopped. He pressed his hands flat on his knees. I stopped seeing you at all. I know that. I know that's what I did. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I let it sit between us. Your employment with Callaway Electric is terminated. Effective today, I said. You'll receive 60 days severance as your contract specifies. Leon is taking over operations. I've restructured the accounts. Your access to everything has already been revoked. He nodded, looking at the desk. Then, quietly, and your will? You'll receive exactly $8,200. He looked up. The same amount you spent on Gary's watch, I said. I thought it was appropriate. The silence in that office was total. Outside, I could hear one of the crew guys starting a truck in the lot. Dad, Derek said, and his voice cracked completely. Dad, I know I can't fix this. I know that. But you have to know. You have to know. I love you. He stopped again. I made you invisible. I know I did. I made you invisible, and you deserved the opposite of that, and I am so sorry. I looked at my son. He was 33 years old, and he was sitting in my office crying, and I felt the full weight of everything, the grief for Carol, the years I'd spent hoping, the money, the party, the $50 gift card with Stephanie's handwriting on the post-it note. I felt all of it at once. I know you love me, I said. That's what makes it worse. You love me, and you still made me invisible. That means something needs to change in you that I can't change for you. He nodded. He wiped his eyes. He didn't argue, didn't negotiate, didn't try to work an angle. He just sat with it. When he stood up to leave, he turned in the doorway and said, Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? Get a therapist, I said. Understand why you needed Gary's approval more than mine. That's the only thing I'd ask. He left. Leon knocked softly on the open door a few minutes later. You doing okay, boss? Yeah, I said. Better than expected. Stephanie called me that evening. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they're managing something they're ashamed of. She apologized for the party, for the disparity in the gifts, for not seeing what she was doing to the dynamic between Derek and me. She was careful and measured, and I believed she meant it. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her that what happened between me and Derek was between me and Derek, and that I didn't hold her responsible for his choices. I told her to take care of Miles, that Miles was the one who had done nothing wrong in any of this, and deserved to be protected from the fallout. She promised she would. Gary Whitmore called me 3 weeks later. I had not expected that. He came to the house, rang the front bell at 10 in the morning, and stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had argued himself into doing something difficult. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table and told me he had found out about the expense records Stephanie had told him. He told me he felt sick about it. He said he had never asked Derek for any of it, never encouraged the spending, never wanted to be the person that caused a rift between a father and his son. He said the watch was already gone. He'd sold it and put the money in a fund for Miles, which he'd coordinate with Patricia through proper channels. He said he knew that didn't fix anything, but it was the most direct thing he could do. I poured us both a cup of coffee and we sat there for an hour. He talked about his own father, who had been a difficult man, proud and withholding. He said he thought Derek had been looking for something from Gary that Gary hadn't been equipped to see clearly. He said he was sorry he hadn't been more alert to it. He said, "You raised a kid who knows how to love people, Richard. He just lost his footing for a while. That's not nothing." It was more than I had expected from him, and I told him so. Miles started coming to my house every other Saturday, just the two of us, the way things had evolved naturally in the year before the party. We cooked, we watched football, we drove out to Alum Creek State Park and threw bread to the geese the way he liked. He asked me once, with the directness that 9-year-olds deploy without warning, whether I was still angry at his dad. "Not angry," I said. "Sad. And working on it. Dad cries sometimes," he said. "He tries to do it when I can't hear. That's because he's figuring something out," I said. "That's what figuring things out looks like sometimes." Miles considered this. "Are you going to let him come back?" "That depends on him," I said. Derek sent a card at Thanksgiving. Handwritten, 2 pages, small, careful handwriting. He talked about therapy. He talked about a pattern he'd identified in himself, a need for external validation that had its roots, according to his therapist, in things that had happened long before Gary Whitmore. He said he was not writing to ask for anything. He was writing because he wanted me to know that the conversation in my office had changed something in him that he believed was permanent. He said he thought about Carol, and about the kind of man he wanted her to have known him to be. He said he was not that man yet, but he was trying to become him. I read the card 3 times. I put it on the mantel beside Carol's photograph. At Christmas, Miles asked if his dad could come for dinner. I said yes. It was quiet and careful and imperfect in all the ways that honest things are. Derek brought a gift, a framed photograph he'd found, one of the 4 of us, me and Carol and Derek at maybe 8 years old, standing in front of the first Callaway electric truck the year I bought it. I didn't know he had that photograph. I didn't know it existed. I held it for a long time. After Miles went to bed, Derek and I sat in the living room with the television off. He told me he'd accepted a project management role at a mid-size electrical firm in Worthington. $60,000 a year. A significant step down. He said he was learning to live within what he earned, and that it was clarifying in ways he hadn't expected. He said Leon had reached out, that they were on decent terms, that he respected what I had done. He said, "I think you saved the company by taking it away from me. I wasn't ready for it. I might never have been." I told him that I didn't know yet what the future looked like for the 2 of us. I told him that I was not interested in punishing him, and I was not interested in pretending. I told him that trust was rebuilt in very small increments over a very long time, and that I was willing to let that process happen if he was willing to be honest inside of it. He said, "Yes, my will has not changed. It will not change." The $8,200 stands as an honest accounting, and the trust for Miles stands as what I believe is the most important thing I can do for the next generation of this family. But I'm not certain those numbers are the ending of this story. I'm not certain anything is the ending while we're both still here. It is July 2024 as I write this. I am sitting on the back porch in Westerville on a warm evening, and Carol's tomatoes are coming in again, the way they do every summer, regardless of everything. Leon is running Callaway Electric with a steadiness that would have made Carol say, "I finally did something right." Miles sat at this table 4 days ago and ate 2 pieces of pie from Schmidt's and talked about the Ohio State football season with a level of detail and seriousness that made me feel like the future might be all right. Derek and I speak on the phone once a week. Short calls, careful ones, real ones. He asked recently if he could come help in Carol's garden this fall. I said I'd think about it. The $50 gift card is still in my shirt pocket, the pocket of the shirt I wore to the party. I haven't used it. I keep it where I can find it when I need to remember what it felt like to be made invisible, and why I decided that day that I was done accepting it. To anyone who has spent years giving everything to a child who forgot to see you, you are not furniture. You are not an ATM. You are not a problem to be managed, or a legacy to be cashed out before it's earned. Requiring respect from the people you love is not cruelty. It is the most honest form of love there is. Sometimes the clearest thing you can do for someone who has stopped seeing you is to step out of the shadow you've been standing in quietly for so long. Step into the light and refuse to move back. Derek is learning that. I am learning to let him. And somewhere, I believe, Carol is watching both of us try. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Stormborn Vengeance and hit the notification bell. We share true stories like this every single. Leave a like if any part of this resonated. And please tell me in the comments where in America you're watching from tonight. I read every single one.